Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. Welcome everyone to extending the power of your research administration system using no-code automation. Today we're going to be hearing stories from a panel of research administrators who currently both use Quali Research and Quali Build and have utilized Build to extend the power of Quali Research further in their research administration departments. A little bit about me first. I'm Katie. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Build team, and I'm here to help just facilitate today's conversation. If you haven't yet been in one of our sessions for Quali Days, a few things to note. All attendees will be on mute throughout today's presentation. If you have any questions, go ahead and click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. You'll know that there's a chat and a Q&A button, so just make sure you check that Q&A button. That's the one that we're going to be monitoring for questions. And feel free to type them in there. We will go ahead and respond to the questions throughout today's webinar. So if you have a question for a specific panelist, we'll be doing panelist 1, 2, and then 3. So feel free to type them in as they come to mind. We also have a time at the end of today's webinar for questions as well. And as with other sessions, this is being recorded as part of our Quali Days track. We will likely be sending all recordings to attendees following the conference, and we will be uploading the slide decks to our Socio app as well. So today we have some exciting panelists from Brad. Welcome. Brad's here with us from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Susan is here with us from Southern Illinois University Edwardsville. And Amy Taylor is here with us from Southern Connecticut State University. They'll each do a quick introduction of themselves, so I'll let you all take the steam. I won't take your steam in terms of an introduction. But before we get into that, one of the things now, if you have attended one of our other Quali Days tracks and you currently are a Quali Research customer, just want to highlight this is the same session we hosted in the Quali Research track. So don't want to make sure we can give you an hour back if that's something that we're joining to see something different. And one of the things that I want to highlight before we jump into each of our panelists' presentation is a little bit about Quali Build. Some of you that are on the line may not know much about Quali Build, so I want to give a quick briefing of what Quali Build is in case you're new to it, and then we'll jump into today's stories. So Quali Build is Quali's no-code form and workflow solution. One of the things that we hear a lot from institutions is that you have a lot of technology systems on campus, but what we find is that even if with all those systems, they still don't solve all of the needs you have. There are small gaps between the systems that cause, as Patrick Burns from Colorado State University said, chronic and pernicious issues with your systems. Now, what Quali Build does is it aims to solve the gaps between those two and does it in a really easy but powerful way. So typically on your campus, you're going to have two different types of systems. On one side of the coin, you have really powerful, complex business systems. Think your ERP, your ECM, student information system. And while these meet business requirements, from IT, they often require an engineer to build and maintain, and they're typically expensive to purchase. On the other side, you have other systems that are really easy to use, so they're accessible to most business users. Think Google Forms or another tool similar to that. They often pop up on campus to try to solve some of those gaps between the systems, those little process things that you need to work through. And typically they're inexpensive, but generally they don't meet all of the power that you need from a larger system or all the security and scalability requirements. So with Build, there's a sweet spot in the middle between these two things, where Build is built on really core design principles. Build empowers business users to do some really powerful things, just like you have on that other side with the complex and powerful systems, but it's actually easy to use. At the same time, it's secure and scalable, so IT will actually sign off on the system. So again, on one side of the coin, you've got your IT department. IT gets a lot of requests to automate some of those gaps between systems. But on the other side of the coin, you have business users. Ultimately, our goal is to empower business users to do the things that IT otherwise would only typically be able to do. So you can get rid of PDFs, so you can get rid of paper forms and really automate in a really powerful way anything that you need to do on your campus. A quick preview of what this looks like. When we dive into Build, this is the dashboard. So the dashboard is where you can easily create applications, forms, and workflow. An application is just a combination of a form and a workflow. And it's really easy. You can see I have new app and I just have to check that and I can create something there. The form layout, once you build it, can be customized and branded, has the ability to have pagination on the form and show and hide fields depending on what someone needs to see. And this screenshot is of the form builder, which is a drag and drop interface where it's really easy to create new fields onto build or create a form that can replicate something that you currently use on your campus. After the form is submitted, any process has a series of typically either, hey, something happened, acknowledgement, or actually you need to look at this and approve it. So we have a workflow builder that makes it really easy to automate any type of workflow process in the system, and you can even route to specific individuals like the department chair or college dean when you're going through the process. So that's a quick primer on to build, and with that in mind, I am going to go ahead and stop talking and kick it over to Miss Amy Taylor, who's going to give us an introduction and tell us about her story.
Sorry, I was muted. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Taylor. I am the Director of Sponsored Programs and Research. Southern Connecticut State University is located in New Haven, Connecticut. I have worked within quality research systems since 2012, 2013 at a couple of different universities. And I consider my role when it comes to Quality Build is I'm really the pioneer for my institution. I brought Quality to my campus, and I'm an advocate, a very strong advocate for the software. And my favorite build feature is the dashboard. So that landing page that Katie showed you a few minutes ago, where you can see all the apps that are available to you and access them, that is one of the favorite features of Quality Build for me, because I can see everything from there and search everything from there. And it's a pretty exciting thing to be able to go to a single place and see everything I need to see, or search for anything I might have lost. SCSU is a predominantly undergraduate institution. What that means is we are predominantly involved in undergraduate and master's degree programs. We have very few PhD programs. We have about 10,000 students on our campus, but we are just like an R1 university in this fact that we have the same kind of research compliance regulations. We have similar basic business processes, and we also have very limited resources and staff, which means that we have to be really focused and strategic as we pioneer innovation on our campus. We have to be really nimble enough to seize any opportunity that comes our way to improve our processes. And Quality Build is something that came my way that I was very happy to jump into, so to speak. In the late fall of 2019, we used paper forms for everything that was related to faculty supplemental pay from grants. So if they had summer pay on their NSF grant, or if they were being appointed to an adjunct teaching position, we processed about 2,500 paper forms per year. And those forms would often get mishandled or lost. There were literally only 8 steps in the approval workflow, but there were hundreds of human hours spent trying to figure out where the paper went. Did it go to the right department? Did it get to the right person? Did the envelope drop behind somebody's desk? And we wondered if Quality Build could help us straighten out this mess. And it would literally be a very transformative step for my campus. And it has been in a very unbelievable way. So we kicked off the 1012 supplemental pay form in mid-January of 2020, and we deployed it on March 6th of 2020. So we had a day-long seminar or event with the Quality representatives, Tad and Shannon. They came, they built the form for us, and within 6 weeks, we had deployed it. We did some in-service training with the completed key approval units before the pandemic. Closed our physical operations, and we put that form into processing To date, we've had about 100 forms processed through the Koali Build app, and not a single form has been lost. Now, the total typical process time for these forms, it can take anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks as the full payroll processes get completed. But this is in comparison to some forms that would get lost and have to be recreated or duplicated, or would sometimes take 3 to 4 months to process from start to finish. So to be able to take it from 3 to 4 months down to a matter of days is a really big improvement for us. My office is the Sponsored Programs and Research Office, or SPAR, and we monitor that dashboard for the time spent in routing, and we reach out to approvers if it seems to be stuck at a particular level for too long. This means roughly about every 2 weeks, we look into the dashboard to see, as the next payroll period is coming to an end, are there forms that appear to be stuck, and can we reach out and move them on so that they can make the next payroll? This is really popular with our faculty because it means the form itself documents not only the approvals, but the last step is payroll, documenting when the pay will be paid, what payroll check they can expect it in, and how much the amount will be. And so what happens is at the end of the form, they get a copy of it, excuse me, that tells them payroll has approved this, this is when it's going to be paid, and this is when how much it's going to be. COVID-19, again, we deployed the form just before our campus shut down for COVID-19, and that delayed the implementation of the teaching form, but we hope to get development completed soon. Excuse me. Next slide. All right, so now after that first form was built, we were part of the Koali, that first form, we were part of a contest, and Koali agreed to build that first form for us free. But we were so impressed with that process that I went ahead and bought the module, and we now use it to support all of these other research administration processes. First of all, it's our after-the-fact payroll certification system. So this is essentially our effort reporting system for all personnel services paid from grants. And I'm happy to report that with my A133 audit this fall, the system cleared every question that my auditors had. And we were able to retrieve documentation, show documentation, not only for this after-the-fact payroll certification, but also how the system helps us identify errors and fix them more quickly. So it really helps to support our need for internal controls. We've also developed 12 different apps that support our faculty development office for internal grant applications and reports and budget submissions. We have about 4 apps that support our pre-award processes. And the reason, well, we don't have a lot of them for pre-award at this point because we use Koali Research for all of our pre-award processes and for our post-award award management. We've developed a number of different apps that communicate with finance units outside of us. So when we uncover cost transfers that need to happen or budget updates, or even as part of our closeout process where we create an inactivation request and let accounting know that the financial unit or index is ready to close. So we have tracking systems or forms and apps that we use to communicate with all of those units. And last summer, as we had a very short window of opportunity or need, I should say, as my campus was adapting to the COVID-19 crisis, we actually helped to support the COVID-19 procedures for the campus in the summer of 2020 in a very basic and rudimentary way. I think Brad's going to show you some additional work that's going to be a lot more fantastic, much more fantastic than what I did. But basically, I have about 30 to 35 forms that are either in development, are actively in use, or have been used and are now ready to retire. I find it's an invaluable tool, and it extends my time as a research administrator, I would say at least threefold. And in terms of the time savings for my campus, because we're not searching for pieces of paper, because we are developing systems that allow a shared electronic platform of information, we are saving time for our faculty, our deans, and our chairpersons every day with every form that we implement. It's really turning into be a time saver for us. Okay.
Thanks, Amy, for sharing your story. We can stop a little bit in case someone has a question. I haven't seen one come through yet, but one I would ask you is that if there's another process, whether that's in research or another one you're familiar with on campus, that you think Build would be really good for, that you'd recommend another institution use Build for, what might that be?
Well, my answer is couched in terms of a small institution. So sometimes the difference between Southern as an institution or UMass Amherst is the type of IT and technical support that is available to us. I'm the system administrator for Koali, and basically it's what can I do in my technical expertise with Koali Build. I'm still working on all my SPAR processes. So, but we have a really good track record with anything that has to be initiated for grant documentation, flow through a fairly simplified approval or workflow process, and then remain in an archive where we can search it, we can find it, and we can pull it for any audit reason that we might have. And this is exceptionally helpful if you're on a paper-based system and beginning to think about how to move to an electronic platform for all of your research administration needs. I think the next thing that I'm looking for is the next, the form I released late last week, which is grant reassigned and release time, which isn't necessarily easily captured, from an in-kind or match perspective. Usually the planning for those course releases are 6 months to a year in advance. So the ability to submit the form, have the approvals in place, and then go back and search for information I need in a year and a half at my fingertips is going to be a really valuable thing. Not sure if I answered that completely for you, Katie.
You did. That was a good answer. Especially, I liked your point around small institutions versus larger ones, because thinking of the technical resources you have, I think, is important when you start to consider what you can do. Great. Thanks, Amy. Next up, Susan, go ahead and take the lead.
Good afternoon. So Susan Morgan. I've been at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville for about 25 years. In the graduate school for about 10 now. So came up through the faculty ranks. My background's environmental engineering, and I think that overlays how I managed our process. So currently my role is Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies. We have a centralized sponsored projects office, as well as overseeing graduate programs on the campus. And for Koali Build, my role, I said, is champion, getting it going, plus kind of a cheerleader and cat herder, getting everybody kind of going the same way. And my favorite feature is the routing feature within Koali Build. So our impetus for looking at Koali Build was the need to reduce workload associated with more than 20 internal funding programs that we have to support both faculty and graduate students' scholarly activities across campus. Some of them are competitive, some are not. I've got a staff of 4 in our pre-award section and 3 in our graduate studies section. And of course, their main jobs are not running internal funding programs, but these take a lot of time. So I wanted to reduce that workload. So why did we look at Koali Build? We've had Koali Research and had a positive experience with the product as well as with the company. It also helped because we already had a contract, and so we're a public institution in that process. It made it actually simpler. Again, there's that routing capability of the product. The configurability for the range of our programs. I mentioned some are competitive, some are not. We have different review processes for the programs. Some have standing committees, some we do some ad hoc, some need research committees out in the schools to review, some don't. So being able to configure that was really important. And then the price for unlimited apps. So I started with these, internal funding programs, but with unlimited apps, then we could look at all of our other processes and trying to automate them. So we kicked off in May of 2020 with this. I wanted all of our internal funding programs live before the start of the fall semester in August. I knew that was very ambitious. I knew that it was likely that timeline would slip, but I wanted that out there in front of all the staff as the timeline, because I didn't want the process going on forever and ever. So that, in a year or two, we've only got part of our programs out there, and then people are confused. Is this one of those things we go to that electronic system for, or is this a paper system? How do we do this? So I wanted that August deadline. We got them all live by the end of fall semester. So in December, we had all of them in some form or fashion. We were having to do some tweaks, but live, including, I noted we had 3 new ones because we didn't have enough internal funding programs at that point. Plus, we were able to get some other forms and processes started working. Some of our, some basic internal paperwork, as well as my director of graduate education really likes Quality Build, has gone in, and she's my go-to guru person who knows how to use it. She's set up event registration and management, as well as some other processes using it. So we've got students and faculty who are using the applications. So some key features for us beyond the basics, and the basics being that, there's no paper to get lost, like Amy was saying, it's an electronic process. And so we have those electronic approvals and no forms to get lost. We require certain fields to get the information we need instead of paper forms coming in. It's like, well, you don't have this or that. We can require those, so they can't even submit unless they put something in that field or given us an attachment that we asked for. We've been able to use the same app for the review process as the submission. Not for all of our programs, but for some of our programs, we've been able to do that. So there's no downloading and then re-uploading into another system. Even when we haven't done the complete review process within the app, we've generally been able to leverage that people are going in, so we're not having to take the materials out. They'll go and look at the materials within Quality Build, and then they maybe go into like Qualtrics so we can gather the evaluations there. And then I put, oh, if you could go back, my very last one, we can electronically notify, and I had everyone there of decision, or we could send it back for corrections. There's everyone that we want to manage, but Amy had mentioned kind of IT stuff and systems, and there are, I've gotten requests that office support be notified. We would have to manually manage that system or that group, that role. And I've just said we're not going to do that. It's not within our people feed, or we use Banner HR. There's not like, this is the office support for department X and this is the office support for department Y in that. So we would have to manually do it. So I'd say it's like, we've got budget managers, we've got PIs, all that, somebody can forward that email to, if there's an office support person who needs it. But everybody else, then we can just electronically notify of the decision. So you're awarded or you're not awarded. So the last slide I got here are some major lessons learned from this process. And the first 2 came about really with that very ambitious timeline I had. And I didn't pay quite enough attention to it. So I told the staff we had this timeline, And so some of them started opening up multiple apps at one time, rather than just opening one app, creating, this is the internal funding program I'm going to start with, and taking the time to learn Quality Build, learn that, how to put together the forms, how to do the workflow, and that we learn best practices and some consistency. So that, feeds into that second one where we don't have a standard format. We're a little better in our forms, but there's sections, I think Katie, you'd mentioned that some sections can be hidden. So we can go through, the submitter fills out their portion, it goes to the first person who needs to approve it, and there's a section that person sees that the submitter didn't, to say if they approve it or not, and so on and so forth. So you can, is that at the top of the form? Is that at the bottom of the form? And then the workflow, very different people had different ideas of how to visualize that workflow and put it in. So there are some that, frankly, I look at and I'm completely confused as to what the workflow is, but the person who developed it understands it. But then that could cause confusion when somebody else has to get into the form or the workflow and manage that process. And we had a highlight of this in a bad way was some of our workflows, we selected within the form what the decision was. And so all of the submissions were approved. And then the workflow divvied it up based, the notifications based on what was within the form. Other workflows were set that if it were awarded, you approved it, but if you weren't awarding, you denied it. And then that divvied up the workflow. So with that variation, we ended up having a program, somebody else was running it because a person was out, and missed that they shouldn't just approve all of the applications. So we awarded to everyone instead of just the 2 people we were supposed to be awarding to. So that caused a whole lot of headaches. So just a lesson learned with that. And then the last one is that basic bit of, if you're going to an electronic system, leverage the capabilities of it, and that there's some things that are going to be automated. And there's a little bit of a tendency to take this paper form and just verbatim plop it into an application of the form itself. And instead of thinking through, I don't need to ask for the date it's submitted because we're going to have the date that it's submitted. We don't need to ask for this other information because we're going to have that information already. As well as just, whenever you're implementing a new process, to think through is like, do I actually need that information? We always ask for it, but do we actually need it? So thinking through all those and making sure people are doing that was another lesson learned that I would encourage anybody who's looking at it to consider up front.
Great, thanks, Susan. I think we have one question that I had for you. It more has to do with your use of quality research. So how have you found that Build has extended and enhanced your use of that system?
So initially what we're doing is getting faculty used to using electronic systems, right? So we have some faculty in particular who they've been using quality research. Either we've got the protocols module as well as proposals. But we have other people who don't use it so much. So I mean that, you get over here and you're using quality build, and then that's a little bit, it helps you go over and use quality research. We are also looking at it. I've started a pre-award spending form. That's one of our post-award forms to help with our award setup in quality research. And we have institutional biosafety committee, but we don't have a whole lot of protocols. So there is an IBC module within KR, but we don't have enough activity in that to make it financially worthwhile. So we're looking at quality build to actually fill that niche for us, to take care of that. So I think we lose some of the protocol capabilities in in it, but we get rid of our paper process.
One question we had from Angela is, could you describe in more detail what the best standard format would be based upon your experience? So is this something like a template that your form and workflow builders would follow?
You know, we got started and we're kind of left with what we've got right now. And we haven't taken the time to step back and come up with kind of a template. On the form itself, I think that in general, we've decided that those, they're called office use only sections. So those sections that are going to go, that aren't going to be visible to everybody, they go at the top. So when somebody comes into the form, they immediately see what I'm going to have to fill out, and then you can scroll down and see what was submitted. But we have some, I think, that are flipped too. You know, you go in and see the form, see all the information, then you see what you have to do. And the workflow, we definitely have not had that conversation yet about what makes sense. I think the workflow is interesting because it's a visualization, really. And so I think that there's, within our office, there's just different ways people are perceiving that visualization. And we in particular have one person who's perceiving it very differently, and it makes complete sense to that person. And the rest of us look at it and go, I don't understand what that workflow is doing. Can we split this up?
Speaking of on the workflow side of things, Lewis asked, what percentage of your research and administration apps use an integration workflow step or an external data gadget?
Oh, that sounds more techie than I am capable of answering.
That might be a good question for Brad, because I know that's right up his alley. So maybe that's a good transition point, unless we have any other questions for Susan. If you have another question, we can walk through it at the end. Brad, do you want to take control and start sharing?
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Brad Cohen. I work in the research IT office at UMass Amherst. I'll be there 2 years this summer. My quality build role is builder, and I say limit pusher because I've had a habit of finding the upper limits of what the system allows as far as app and workflow size, but the build team has been wonderful helping us, work through that anytime it comes up, and we always work together and find a solution. And my favorite build feature would be the integrations. So why did UMass choose Koali Build? We needed a more robust tool that could handle the sort of complex forms and workflows that we'd been struggling to streamline. Other tools were extremely limiting as far as adding multiple approvers, being able to designate which fields each approver could edit when it came to them. And Build was our answer to those and a number of other roadblocks. So as of today, we have 15 live forms and more in development that are being added all the time. And we do make use of the quality research APIs and the Build integrations to pull research data into Koali Build. So here's one example of one of our integrations that's currently in use. So this one uses the Koali award number as an input to pull in other award fields like title and sponsor. And this is just a small subset of what is in the API that we're using on the form. But if you actually dig in, there are, dozens of fields that you can pull in. It's a simple addition to a form, but this sort of integration meant no more concerns about typos in the text, no need to cut and paste from the record itself. Once you enter a valid quality award number into that field, the rest populates automatically. So we make use of this integration on our Memorandum of Understanding form for post-award, which was actually the form we used as our litmus test for whether Build was the right tool for us. What made this specific form so complex was the number of users that could be involved and the data that needed to be gathered at the various steps. So for this, every PI and co-PI needed to approve this form. And if there's a change needed from what was in the proposal development stage, approvals also have to be sent to both the department and college levels. So this meant having a workflow that included a separate branch for each possible number of co-PIs with a sub-branch for each that would include approvals for the department and college if the situation called for it. And no other tool that we tried could handle this sort of workflow, and any that we did try only resulted in the frustration for the researchers and our post-award staff. Not only did it allow us to accomplish what we needed, but the time it took for the forms to come back complete went from weeks or even months all the way down to hours or days. We also use the APIs to sync the user list from Quality Research into Quality Build on a daily basis. And so that meant that all of our other forms could be migrated to Build, and any UMass user with an active account could access them. We've also been able to sync the existing approval hierarchy from Quality Research into Quality Build. And so there was no need to reinvent the wheel for form approvals when we already had the information in Quality Research who should be approving. So we only needed to push that data into Build. So we took the primary and delegate approvers from the existing groups in proposal development and migrated them into the Build groups hierarchy that we use on our forms. This also updates on a daily basis so that any approver changes made in Quality Research automatically flow into Quality Build. So this streamlined the workflow of something like an access request form. All you have to do is enter the unit you want access to on the form along with the type of access you need. And the form already knows who should receive the approval based on what unit you selected. We went live with Build in February 2020, just before everything shut down. So having Build also meant that we had the right tool for the job when we needed to come up with a way to have researchers request to regain access to their research spaces on campus again. So not only could it leverage the existing unit approval hierarchy that was already in place for proposal development, but it could also send out approvals depending on what sort of research was being conducted. So there were specific answers on the form to the questions, and the appropriate approvals are included in the workflow accordingly, depending what the answer was. So for example, the need for additional approvals if there's specific research locations on campus or something like human subjects research. The raw data exported from this build form was then able to be transformed by one of my colleagues into Tableau dashboards that could be used to analyze building capacity, do contact tracing, and track the research activity across campus. Last but not least, we also used a build form for our research help desk, which gathers the appropriate information from the user and uses a notification sent directly from a build notification to our ticketing system. And that's all I have.
I always love you showing some of those screenshots of, I'm so impressed with how much you all have been able to do, particularly when it comes to the integration side of things.
Thank you.
One question I have for you is, how did you initially get buy-in for Quality Build on your campus?
So for us, it was that memorandum of understanding form I had showed earlier. That form had been in a number of different systems. It was in Adobe Sign, it was paper, it was emailed PDF, and right before we got Build, Adobe Sign was going away. UMass was doing away with that and moving to DocuSign. So we took that time to test it out in Build. And when it did everything that we needed to have happen on that form workflow and showed that to the people involved, they all were completely on board with going forward with Build.
Great. Thank you for sharing. If you all have any other questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the Q&A box or the chat box. And then Brad, if you want to stop sharing, I'll take control back and can go through just the last few slides we've got while we wait for some questions to come in. So if you've been in some of our sessions, you've probably seen these, but if you do have a question, you can always contact us directly at build@quality.co. And I will put a plug in for Amy, Southern Connecticut. Amy was our first contest winner, so you now have heard her story. You know it's true, it's real. Our contest actually officially closes on Friday, so we are accepting the final submissions in these next 3 days. go ahead and scan this QR code or just go to quali.co/contest if you would like to submit an application. And that would give you a free build app for 2 years. Is the winner of the contest will receive that. And that's pretty much what we have. So we'll hang on the line, and if you have any more questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. We'd be happy to work through them. Maybe while we're waiting for some questions, Amy, what I'll ask you is, I know you have done a really good job at learning the extensive build, and I really liked how Susan on some of her slides had included, these are some of our best practice lessons learned. Is there anything that you can think of that you were like, oh, I wish I had known that earlier?
Well, I'm not a techie by trade, right? So I'm a certified research administrator. And so one of the things that one of the skill sets that I sort of bring to the build, the process, is it's really helpful to use a fairly standardized form or template. So that I don't have to recreate the wheel all over again. You know, I have a model that works, and I try to replicate that as I go along. The form looks familiar, the fields remain familiar, and it helps build a skill and expertise for those of us who are building apps in the Quali Build system. There are 1, 2, 3, 5 of us that are on staff in my office who have the ability to create an app, develop it, and deploy it. And with such a small deployment group, it was really easy to say, well, you know, it's really it's Amy's toy, you know, it's Amy's thing, she can put it together. But it becomes really important to standardize what we're doing and evaluate what we're doing, and to begin to have some key fields that we put in that help the campus users who are looking at that dashboard really have some functionality and support for it. The best example I can give you, well, I haven't really answered your question, but the thing is what I don't know, I learn every time I attend one of these sessions, like watching what Brad can do and watching what Susan can do, and being reminded of best practices and how to keep things consistent at the simplest level, but again, realizing it can get very complex if it needs to. Those things are just crucial and important. I mentioned earlier in the presentation a form I deployed late last week related to course release approval. Literally during this session, the assistant dean responsible replied for one of those schools, replied back and said, well, how do I search for just my college? And I went, oh, I forgot to put that search field available on the form so it can show up on the dashboard. So there are some sort of, as we move along, we're developing sort of tips and hints of, you know, and standards that we have for our own forms, so that we remember how to make it easy and accessible, not only for those of us who are in it every day and building it, but for those people on the campus that we want them to use that dashboard and be able to view the forms.
That's great. I hadn't heard of the idea of a template as frequently, so I think that's a really, really good suggestion, especially as people get started and build. Maybe a question on top of that I would be curious to know from any of you would be, Susan, I also really liked your point of teach people how to think about form building. That's one thing that I see when someone who maybe hasn't worked with a tool like this gets into it. Is I was just working with a colleague the other day, and I was walking through how if I have a PDF form on my campus that has a date field, I don't have to think of putting that date field into the system because the system captures it. And if you know systems like this, you think about that. But like, what advice would you have for someone, especially as they're working with someone that maybe isn't as familiar with a tool like this, to help them wrap their head around ways to think about it?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question, because you have to have just those kind of basic concepts, right, to understand. I don't need that date field in there. I guess just if you don't know what the kind of common things are or the specific capabilities, I think that's starting with, here's this form. What's the purpose of the form? Do we need to ask this regardless, right? Do we need this piece of information really, or do we not? Because I found a lot of times in our forms, it's just like, why are we asking for it? We don't need this. It's completely useless for this process, right? So pare it down to what's really necessary. And so then I guess if you don't really, maybe you're going to have to be working with some kind of IT assistance, unless you're the IT person, in which case you should kind of have an idea on these, and then taking a look at it, I guess, and going, okay, so we don't need to ask for a date. We're gonna be pulling in names. So what's the best way to set up? We were just having an email conversation about this on moving to the smart gadget sort of thing, where are we going to have people suggest they type in the person's EID, or do you start typing in a name, or what's the best way to do that? And that has come. So some of our people who've managed troubleshooted and managed the forms more have said, some people, if it's a common name, it's been easier to do it from the EID, because everybody has a unique EID. So that's essentially the email address, right? Email address. So, yeah, I guess, forms where people are able to ask questions and come, things like that. Oh, you might want to consider, is it easier to do the EID, or is it easier to do the name? Sometimes EIDs aren't the names, so then it's hard, what's the person's EID? So, but having those opportunities, to touch base with other people who are using the product and say, hey, what have you found? Is this a better way to do it, or is that a better way to do it?
That's helpful. When I'll throw out, I knew I'm still waiting for questions to come through. So please, if you have a question, throw it in. We've got a few 10 minutes or so on this session, so we might wrap up here early. But one question that I'll tack on to that is, it's interesting for me to see the process and the tools someone goes through when they brainstorm form creation. So for me, I've worked with tools like this for quite some time. So I'm comfortable just getting in the system and thinking about it and saying, okay, I need this gadget or this gadget. But generally, if I was to work with someone who's a little newer, I might whiteboard it first, or I might work with them, if I can work in person, and do sticky notes and write a sticky, or we might take the paper or PDF form, print it out, and write on it. So have you found a technique or a tool that either you use or that you've seen other people use that would be good to recommend to someone who's maybe a little newer to form building?
I think there's been some of all of that. And I think it's been the person getting into the form, because as Amy had mentioned, I wanted multiple people to know how to do this. I didn't want, we had the only person who knew how to use Build. So, so that comes with a variety of personalities and techie skill sets, and even beyond the skill set, just the comfortableness with it. So when we launched Quality Research, I kept pushing people and saying, you can't break it, so just get in and do whatever, click whatever, you're not going to break the system. And on Quality Build, I said that some people just were very hesitant. They don't really like techie stuff, and they really struggled because we were just in the system making forms. And I think having that concept, is just like, oh, take it out, do stickies, write on the, the form application itself, or do a whiteboard, whatever. I think kind of visualization process helps people versus, some people can just get in and start, well, if I pull this over and pull that over. And now with the workflow testing, which is a cool feature, and I don't know that any of us mentioned that, you go in, you figure out where you did things wrong. You can see the messages that come up and go, yeah, no, we need different information. all that, so you can play with it and visualize it that way. But I think, yeah, to your point, there's some people who need to do it kind of outside the system and then go into it.
If I could add an extra comment, Katie.
Yeah,
So
please.
one of the things that we have added to our development process is some continual process improvement techniques around working with exactly who is our customer of the form. So there's the technological side where you want to create the information and move it along the workflow to the endpoint. But along the way, the one of the really powerful features of Build is that ability to create custom viewer roles and to teach the campus how to access and read that data in a way that they've maybe not had before. So in the typical processes, and certainly the ones that Brad talked about, Adobe Sign, DocuSign, whatever, your only view of the form along the workflow is when you have to look at it and you have to approve it. But the real power of the system comes after the fact, comes after the end, where you want to see, you want to extract raw data for a dashboard, as Brad has done at UMass. Or if you're a dean who's like, oh my God, I have to find all the emails of where I approved these kinds of things for this reason. No, there's a place that's secure within our system where that dean or that assistant dean can go and look for things that just pertain to their college. And so that helps you design your form with key identifiers that you consistently add to the forms, so that your public facing campus users can easily get in and access the system. I mean, it's not hard to make the case that transferring from paper to an electronic platform saves you time. But the more difficult and the more impressive savings is what happens after the fact, is what kind of knowledge management do you have with the information that you're collecting, and the ability to export it in a PDF form or export it to a raw data file that you can use in a dashboard later on. That capability is worth 10 times whatever it is you think you saved when you simply processed the form the first time around. And that, I think, is really critical, is that it helps you become a knowledge manager as opposed to a task manager.
I really like that.
I'd also like to add just that, so, at UMass, I've currently been the only one, building the forms. So I've seen that sometimes it's hard for others to visualize what they really want it to look like. Say if they know they have an idea that they want to turn into a form, but they haven't seen it yet. I tend to just sort of build what I keep calling a shell, so that I can show them, since I'm familiar with the system, and give them something to look at that we can then build off of together, no pun intended, to get it where they want it to be, and then sort of without overloading them with looking at too much at once, but showing them what the system can do. And the other thing that I think is really important to think about as far as like a best practice when you're making a form is the reporting aspect, because some forms, like my help desk form, all the reporting happens, elsewhere. It happens in the ticketing system. But for others, there's going to be things that you might not think to capture on the form that somebody's going to ask you about in a couple months, and might have wished you had that data on there just so that it can be there for the reporting, even if it's not some required field for what the process is. And so, thinking about that stuff beforehand has definitely been beneficial for building new apps.
Those are great recommendations, especially they all center around user influence. And
right.
Really good inclusion and surveying of exactly what someone wants to get out of it. But I also hadn't heard the idea of building a shelf, so I think that's a really neat approach. Susan, you mentioned the tester, the workflow tester, workflow simulator. So we can wrap this session up. We've got about 5 minutes. I'll let you all get to your next meeting, but I will put a silent plug in that in 15 minutes at 1:15 Mountain Standard Time, I am doing a session on that kind of will showcase some of those more advanced features around how you can do a more complex workflow and then integrate it with a business intelligence tool and use the workflow simulator to test it. So if you're interested in seeing that, join us again in 15 minutes. But thank you all for being on our panel today and sharing your stories. And thank you all who attended. Have a good rest of your afternoon.